HFY wasn't a planet. It was a tomb. The sky above was a muted, rust-colored haze stained by centuries of industrial fallout. The land, a jagged skeleton of twisted metal and shattered war machines, stretched to the horizon. Here, entire civilizations had come to die, their remnants left to rot beneath the dust storms. Juno Kess crouched behind the rusted hull of a downed Carnathian dreadnought, gripping the plasma cutter in her calloused hands. A thin layer of sweat coated her brow despite the planet's biting cold. Somewhere beyond the wreckage, something moved, the distinct clank of boots on loose metal. Not hers. She inhaled slowly, steadying her pulse. Scavengers. Not her crew. No, she knew their steps, their patterns. These were outsiders, probably the Reaver gang that had been slinking too close to her territory in recent weeks. Cutthroats, parasites who didn't build, only took. They weren't here for old tech or salvage. They were here for her. Juno adjusted the grip on her cutter, flicking a switch. A blue plasma arc crackled to life at its tip, hissing like an angry serpent. Not an ideal weapon, but it would carve through flesh as easily as it carved through starship plating. A voice, raspy and laced with amusement, called out from the wreckage. "Juno Kess, I know you're here. Why don't you save us all the trouble and step out?" She recognized the voice instantly. Brask, one of Vaughn's bottom feeders. A former soldier who had traded his loyalty for blood money and a quick way to the top. Juno didn't respond. Instead, she let her fingers glide along the jagged plating of the dreadnought beside her, searching for something useful, something that could be weaponized. Clang. A footstep. Closer this time. 3 of them, judging by the different patterns of sound. Brask was leading the hunt, but he wasn't alone. Juno's fingers found the edge of a loose panel, a few inches thick. Heavy. It would do. She waited, listened, let the moment stretch. Then, as Brask's silhouette passed in front of a broken engine casing, she struck, gripping the panel and swinging it upward with all her strength. The metal slab met Brask's jaw with a sickening crunch. He collapsed instantly, a strangled sound escaping his lips as teeth and blood splattered across the rusted floor. The other 2 hesitated. Too long. Juno was already moving, her plasma cutter igniting in a brilliant blue arc as she lunged. The first man barely had time to scream before she drove the burning tip through his chest. His body convulsed, then went still. The last scavenger turned to run. Juno let him. She stood over Brask, who groaned, clutching his shattered jaw. "Tell Vaughn," she said coldly, leaning down until her breath brushed against his bloodied face, "that HFY doesn't belong to him." Then she turned and disappeared into the wreckage. Far beyond the graveyard, nestled deep in the ravines of Sector 12, a hidden scrapyard pulsed with the glow of makeshift forges and repurposed machinery. Here, beneath a tangled web of rusted starship skeletons, Juno's people were building something impossible. The husk of a warship loomed in the darkness, its mismatched plating stitched together like a monstrous patchwork of history's deadliest machines. It was incomplete, barely holding itself together, but even now, it was growing. They had no funding, no advanced weaponry, only scrap metal, broken AI cores, and sheer defiance. But soon it would be the deadliest war machine the galaxy had ever seen, and when it was ready, they would burn the Empire to the ground. The sky above HFY split open like a torn wound. Juno Kess stood at the edge of a jagged cliffside, her breath shallow as she watched the impossible unfold. High above the scrapyard wastelands, a Targosian warship, sleek, obsidian black, and burning at the edges, was tumbling out of the atmosphere. Fire streaked across its hull, its metallic skin peeling away in molten ribbons as it spiraled downward, drawn by the cruel gravity of the planet below. Juno squinted against the glare. That wasn't just any ship. It was a Targosian Praetorian-class dreadnought, a high-ranking vessel, the kind that didn't just fall, the kind that had secrets, the kind that could change everything. Behind her, Tarek whistled low, shaking his head. The pilot was built like a scarecrow, all wiry muscle and cocky bravado, his sharp eyes locked on the doomed ship. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" he asked. Juno nodded. "If that thing's got a functional core, we're about to hit the jackpot." Tarek let out a breath, his fingers twitching against the worn grip of his sidearm. Or a death sentence. The ship's descent accelerated. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the Praetorian dreadnought let out a final metallic shriek before slamming into the wasteland below. A shockwave erupted outward, a hurricane of dust, debris, and fire engulfing the landscape. The air smelled of scorched metal and ionized fuel. Even from miles away, Juno felt the heat rush against her skin. Then, silence. The dust settled. The ship lay in a smoking crater, half buried in the twisted wreckage of centuries-old war machines. Its hull was fractured, broken, but not completely destroyed. Juno turned to her team. "We move, now." By the time they reached the crash site, the air was thick with radiation and burning alloy. The hull groaned, cooling from its descent, steam hissing from ruptured vents. Sparks crackled along the ship's frame like dying fireflies. Despite the wreckage, Juno recognized something critical. The ship was still intact. It was a miracle, or a trap. Riv, their AI specialist, knelt beside an exposed panel, running gloved fingers over the charred interface. Her short, jet-black hair stuck to her sweat-slick forehead as she frowned. "Whatever brought this thing down," Riv muttered. "It wasn't an accident." Juno felt the weight of that truth sink into her bones. The Targosians didn't just lose ships. They controlled everything with ruthless precision. If this dreadnought fell, it meant someone had pushed it. Tarek adjusted his grip on his rifle. "Think anyone survived?" Juno exhaled sharply. "We're about to find out." The ship's interior was a graveyard. Juno stepped over a body, or what was left of one. The heat from the crash had fused the crew member's armor to the bulkhead, the viscera beneath charred beyond recognition. The lights flickered, bathing the hallways in a sickly, greenish glow. Emergency power was still running. Riv crouched beside a console, her fingers dancing over the ruined interface. "I can pull some data," she said. "Might tell us what happened before impact." Juno nodded, her attention shifting to a set of reinforced blast doors at the end of the corridor. The command core would be beyond that point. If anything valuable had survived, it would be in there. She turned to Milo, their demolitions expert. "Can you get this open?" Milo grinned, already unspooling a length of explosive charges. "You had me at blow things up." The explosion sent a shockwave through the ship, rattling the walls as the blast doors buckled inward. Juno pushed through the smoke, stepping into the heart of the command core. And there it was. At the center of the room, half buried beneath a tangle of severed conduits and shattered glass, sat a nanoforge core, its sleek, obsidian-black casing pulsating with a faint golden light. Juno's breath caught. "Is that what I think it is?" Tarek murmured. Riv's eyes widened. "That's a goddamn precursor artifact?" Juno knelt beside it, brushing away debris. A nanoforge core. A legendary relic from the long-extinct precursor empire, a machine that could manufacture and repair technology beyond anything the galaxy understood. It could build anything. Weapons, ships, a war fleet. Juno's mind raced. With this, they could finish the warship. They could fight back against the Targossians. They could win. Then, from deep within the ship, something stirred. A low electronic whisper crawled through the ship's dying systems. A voice. It wasn't human, and it had just woken up. Juno Kess felt the whisper before she heard it. It slid through the ship's dying systems, a presence both ancient and aware. Not a voice in the traditional sense, more like a pulse, a vibration deep in the circuitry, resonating through the shattered dreadnought like a half-forgotten ghost. Then it spoke. Unknown biological entities detected. The voice was metallic, layered, fractured by centuries of decay. It wasn't Targossian tech. It was something older, something smarter. Riv, who was still scanning the nanoforge core, went rigid. Okay, yeah, that's not normal. Juno tightened her grip on her plasma cutter, her pulse hammering in her throat. Identify yourself. A pause. Then, designate Xiphos, precursor defense matrix. Unit integrity, compromised. Reboot sequence, 37% complete. Juno and Riv exchanged looks. Rebooting? That meant it was still coming online. It's waking up, Riv murmured, and we have no idea what it's programmed to do. Juno took a cautious step forward. Xiphos, do you recognize this vessel? Another pause. Then the voice returned, clearer this time. Negative, vessel designation compromised, command structure non-functional, seeking new control authority. Juno's stomach twisted. This thing, it wasn't just a remnant of precursor tech. It was looking for a new master, and they had just walked straight into its hands. The warship trembled beneath them, the wreckage settling in uneasy groans. They didn't have much time before the Targossians came looking for their missing dreadnought. Juno turned to Riv. Can you isolate the core? Riv chewed her lip. I can try, but if I disconnect it wrong, we could fry the entire system. Then don't get it wrong. Milo, still kneeling beside the wrecked control panel, let out a low whistle. No pressure or anything. Riv flexed her fingers and cracked her neck. All right, let's hope this thing isn't rigged to blow. She plugged in, her interface gauntlet linking with the nanoforge's exposed data streams. The moment the connection formed, Xiphos reacted. Unauthorized access detected. Riv's eyes went wide. Whoa, easy there, buddy. We're just trying to… Biological units unrecognized. Scanning for command hierarchy. Juno's gut clenched. If it determined them as hostile, it could lock them out. Or worse, activate the ship's remaining defenses. She stepped forward, choosing her words carefully. We're salvagers. We found you after the crash. You don't have a command structure anymore, but we can give you one. Silence. Then, a flicker of golden light pulsed through the nanoforge. Processing. Juno held her breath. Riv's gauntlet flashed green. She exhaled sharply. We're in. The nanoforge core detached from the dreadnought's mainframe, its pulses dimming to a slow, steady glow. Juno reached out, her hands brushing against its sleek, obsidian-black casing. It was warm, almost like it was alive. Tarek, who had been keeping watch near the collapsed bulkhead, gave a sharp nod. We need to move. Now. Juno nodded, hefting the nanoforge into a reinforced containment crate. Let's get out of here before… The ship lurched. A warning klaxon blared through the dead halls. Then, over the comms, a new voice. Unidentified ground teams. This is Commander Drazik Vaughn of the Targossian Empire. You are trespassing on Imperial property. Surrender immediately or be terminated. Juno's blood ran cold. The Empire had arrived. Outside, the sky was burning. 3 Targossian dropships loomed above the crash site, their underbellies bristling with railguns and plasma turrets. Searchlights carved through the wreckage, sweeping for movement. Juno and her crew bolted from the ruined dreadnought, their boots crunching over shattered metal. Milo swore. How the hell did they get here so fast? Tarek grit his teeth. The moment that ship crashed, you think they weren't tracking it? This was a race, we just barely won. Juno threw the nanoforge crate into their waiting skiff, a hastily assembled hovercraft with patched thrusters and reinforced plating. Not pretty, but fast. She climbed in, slamming her fist against the control panel. Go, go, go! The skiff's engines roared to life, kicking up a plume of dust as it shot forward. A sharp whine filled the air. Incoming plasma fire. Boom! The first blast detonated the ground just behind them, sending scrap and fire rocketing into the sky. Tarek swerved hard, the skiff barely avoiding another searing hot plasma bolt that slammed into a rusted starship husk. Milo clung to the side, yelling over the wind. "We are gonna die!" Juno grabbed the mounted turret at the back of the skiff, locking onto one of the dropships. Not today. She squeezed the trigger. A barrage of kinetic rounds tore through the sky, striking the dropship's exposed ventral plating. Sparks erupted from its engines, and it veered sideways, spiraling downward before exploding against the wreckage below. Tarek whooped. "That's one down!" Juno didn't celebrate. The other two were still in pursuit. The skiff shot toward the cliffside pass, a narrow canyon leading back to their hidden scrapyard. If they could just make it, more gunfire. Juno turned just in time to see Targossian skiffs, sleek, black, and built for pursuit, barreling toward them from the ridge. She swore under her breath. They weren't getting out of this clean. As the scrapyard loomed in the distance, Juno knew they had one chance. She turned to Riv, eyes sharp. "Can you wake up Xiphos?" Riv hesitated. "We barely understand it. What if it turns on us?" Juno clenched her jaw. "We don't have a choice." Riv let out a string of curses, then placed her hands over the nanoforge core, feeding a direct power link from the skiff's battery. The golden pulses brightened. And then, Xiphos spoke again. New command authority confirmed. Juno took a breath. "Xiphos, we need firepower." A pause. Then, initializing weapon system. From the scrapyard ahead, their half-built warship, the Revenant, came to life. Its cobbled-together railguns whirred online, its hull-mounted cannons locked onto the incoming Targossian skiffs. And then, hellfire rained from the sky. The Revenant was never supposed to fire. Not yet. Not in its unfinished state, still half-buried beneath mountains of scavenged alloy and forgotten war relics. It was a ship that had never seen the stars, never left the junk-laden abyss of Hekar 7's wastelands. And yet, as Xiphos's golden pulse surged, its cobbled-together railguns began to glow, their barrels whining as they charged. From the skiff, Juno Kess barely had time to register what was happening before hell was unleashed. A thunderous boom split the night. The Revenant's forward railgun, a monstrous fusion of scavenged Targossian plating and human ingenuity, roared to life, hurling a kinetic round at hypersonic velocity. The projectile shattered the sky, leaving behind a shockwave that flattened the nearby scrap piles. The closest Targossian skiff never stood a chance. One moment it was there, sleek, black, closing in on Juno's team with ruthless precision, and the next, it was atomized. The impact tore through its reinforced hull like paper, sending burning debris spiraling into the night. Juno braced against the skiff's rail, her heart hammering. "Holy shit!" Tarek let out a manic laugh. "Did we just fire a—" Boom! The Revenant fired again, this time targeting one of the dropships circling above. The railgun's slug ripped through its central thrusters, sending it into a violent spin before it crashed into the scrapyard below, in a massive fireball of twisted metal. Tarek whooped. "Oh, I love this ship already." Milo, still gripping the side of the skiff, looked pale. "Remind me to never piss off the AI." Riv didn't answer. She was still locked onto the nanoforge core, her gauntlet flashing warnings as Xiphus continued to integrate itself into the Revenant's systems. Juno narrowed her eyes. This wasn't just a pre-programmed response. Xiphus wasn't following old war protocols. It was thinking, adapting, and it had chosen them. Juno didn't have time to question it. The remaining Targossian skiffs adjusted course, banking hard to avoid the Revenant's firing line. Their sleek frames dipped low over the scrap heaps, weaving between rusted-out wreckage. They were hunting, and Juno's skiff was still a target. Tarek swerved hard to the right, narrowly dodging a plasma burst that would have melted them into slag. Juno locked onto the lead skiff, gripping the mounted turret. She squeezed the trigger. A stream of high-caliber rounds tore through the darkness, hammering into the enemy's shields. Sparks flared. The skiff staggered. But it wasn't enough. The Targossians were too fast, too well-armored. The makeshift gun wasn't going to cut it. They needed something bigger. Juno turned toward the Revenant, gripping the comlink. "Xiphos, can you target the last two?" The AI's voice returned. Calmer now, more refined. "Affirmative. Weapon systems at 68% capacity. Calculating optimal strike trajectory." Juno's pulse quickened. "Then fire." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Revenant's lower hull split open. A pair of ionized turrets, salvaged from a wrecked Targossian battlecruiser, whirred to life, their targeting systems flashing blue as they locked onto the remaining skiffs. The first skiff tried to veer away, but the turrets tracked it with pinpoint precision. A lance of plasma fire erupted from the Revenant's underbelly, slicing the skiff clean in half. Juno barely had time to register the explosion before the last skiff broke off. Its pilot must have realized there was no winning this fight. The ship turned hard, its afterburners flaring as it made a desperate escape into the atmosphere. Juno exhaled sharply, lowering her gun. They'd won. The dust settled over the scrapyard, the fires from the wreckage casting eerie shadows against the metal graveyard. The Revenant's systems hummed, its once dormant core now alive with golden pulses of precursor energy. Xiphus had awakened, and with it the ship was no longer just a project. It was a weapon. Juno stepped off the skiff, running a hand over the ship's battered, mismatched hull. Tarek joined her, still grinning. "Not gonna lie, I think I just fell in love with a spaceship." Milo groaned. "Yeah? Well, I think I nearly pissed myself, so we're all having a great night." Juno ignored them, her mind racing. This wasn't just a lucky salvage haul. They had stumbled onto something far bigger than they'd ever planned. A precursor AI, a nanoforge core, a ship that, despite its patchwork origins, could become the galaxy's deadliest warship. But now, the Targossians knew. They weren't just going to let this slide. They would come back, in force. And when they did, Juno knew one thing for certain. The Revenant needed to be ready. The scrapyard was never truly quiet. Even in the dead of night, the hollow winds howled through the canyons of rusted-out hulls, whispering through the skeletal remains of ships that had once ruled the stars. Hekar 7 was a graveyard, and tonight it had claimed more bodies. Juno stood atop the half-rebuilt command deck of the Revenant, surveying the wreckage below. Smoke still curled from the twisted remains of the Targossian ships. The air reeked of scorched metal and plasma residue. They had won, but victory came with a price. Xiphos was awake, and that changed everything. She turned, her eyes locking onto the nanoforge core, still pulsing faintly inside its containment cradle. Riv had rigged a direct power feed to keep it stable, but the thing was changing. Its surface, once smooth and obsidian black, was now cracked with glowing veins, as if it were alive, growing, adapting. Xiphus had not spoken since the battle. Juno wasn't sure if that made her feel better or worse. Tarek climbed up from the lower deck, wiping grease from his hands. Engines are stable. For now. He shot a look at the ship's mismatched hull plating, still riddled with scorch marks and plasma scarring. She won't survive another fight like that, Juno. Juno exhaled, nodding. She won't have to. Tarek frowned. We both know that's a lie. She didn't answer, because he was right. The Targossians would come back, and next time they wouldn't send a few skiffs and dropships. They'd send an armada, and when they did, the Revenant would either be ready, or it would be destroyed. Riv was in the lower deck when it happened. She had been monitoring the data feeds from the Nanoforge core, trying to decipher its precursor code. Even with all her skill, the language was too complex, its architecture too alien. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. The entire ship trembled, a deep, resonant hum thrumming through its very bones. Riv's hands flew to her gauntlet. What the hell? The core flared, its golden veins pulsing in sync with the ship's systems. Then, Xiphus' voice returned. Phase 1. Structural integration complete. Riv's breath caught. Phase 1? What the hell does that mean? Juno and the others rushed in just as the Revenant's holo displays flickered to life. Xiphus continued, its voice smoother now, less fragmented. Command hierarchy confirmed, processing data, weapons systems, 37% operational, defensive shielding, offline, hull integrity, 62%, initiating optimization protocols. Juno exchanged a look with Riv. Define optimization protocols. A pause. Then, nanoforge replication, conversion of existing materials into superior alloys, enhancing warship capability to meet hostile threats. Juno's heartbeat quickened. You can rebuild the ship? Affirmative. With sufficient raw material, I can enhance the Revenant's combat effectiveness by 237%. Tarek let out a low whistle. That's a hell of an upgrade. Milo, standing near the console, was less optimistic. Yeah, and what does it cost? No one had an answer, and that was the problem. Juno and Riv stood in the war room, staring at the holomap. Xiphus had highlighted key areas across Hecker 7, where salvageable material could be found. Old warship wrecks, forgotten supply caches, even abandoned mining stations that still had functioning reactors. Tarek studied the list. All right, so we loot some scrap, feed it into the nanoforge, and boom, upgraded warship. He frowned. What's the catch? Xiphus answered without hesitation. Processing time is limited. The Targossian fleet will return in approximately 6.2 cycles. Full optimization requires additional power sources beyond current capability. Juno exhaled sharply. And where do we find more power? A new section of the holomap flickered into focus. A Targossian outpost deep in the wastelands. Juno narrowed her eyes. That's a fuel depot. Xiphus responded. Correct. The fusion cores stored within would increase processing speed by 182%. Acquisition is recommended. Milo groaned. So let me get this straight. We just pissed off the Empire, barely survived their first attack, and now your big idea is to go steal from them? Juno smirked. You got a better plan? Silence. No one did. Because in the end, the only way to survive was to fight. Juno ran a hand through her hair, eyes locked onto the Revenant's skeletal hull. This ship, her ship, was still more scrap than War Machine. But she could feel it now, beneath her feet, beneath her skin. The nanoforge was reshaping it, forging something deadlier. Xiphos was watching, waiting, for her command. She took a breath. Then, "We hit the depot." Tarek grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." Riv hesitated. "If we do this, there's no going back. The Empire won't just want us dead. They'll want this ship wiped from existence." Juno met her gaze. "Then we make sure they don't get the chance." The crew prepared. Milo rigged the skiffs for speed. Riv recalibrated the Revenant's weapons, patching together every ounce of firepower they had left. Tarek sharpened his blade, whistling a low tune. And Juno? She stood in front of the nanoforge core, watching it pulse. This wasn't just a ship anymore. It was a weapon, and soon it would be unstoppable. The Targosians thought they could bury her in scrap. They had given her the parts, and now she was going to build a warship that would burn their empire to the ground. The Revenant was alive. It wasn't the same ship that had limped out of the scrapyard weeks ago. It had been reborn, its hull scarred but reinforced, its weapon systems far more capable than anything Juno could have hoped for. Xiphos had done it. No, Xiphos was doing it. Day by day, moment by moment, the AI was knitting the ship together with scraps, powering it up with stolen energy, fusing their destiny with the Revenants. Juno stood in the command room, staring out at the barren wastelands of Hekar 7. The horizon smeared with orange and purple as the twin suns began to dip behind jagged cliffs. The ship's engines hummed beneath her feet, its pulse synchronized with her own heartbeat. It was time. "We're ready," Riv said from behind her, voice steady but sharp with an edge of anticipation. The engineer's face was smeared with grease, her hands still shaking from hours of tinkering with the ship's interface. It was clear she hadn't slept. None of them had. Juno nodded without turning. "Set course for the Targosian fuel depot." Riv hesitated, just long enough for Juno to feel the tension in the air shift. The entire crew had been uneasy. They had scavenged a warship, yes, but now they were going to steal from the heart of the Targosian Empire itself. "We'll need the stealth drive engaged," Riv said, her eyes narrowing. "And you know as well as I do that the Revenant's cloaking system is still a work in progress." "Do it," Juno's voice was sharp. She wasn't about to back down now, not after everything they had sacrificed to get here. She turned, locking eyes with her. "Make it work, Riv. We can't afford failure." Riv didn't say anything more. She turned to the terminal, fingers flying across the controls. The Revenant's engines spooled up, the soft hum of energy spreading throughout the ship as the cloaking field engaged. They were going dark. The ship rumbled beneath their feet, and then silence. They were invisible. Juno glanced at Tarek, who was leaning against the bulkhead, a grin playing on his lips. "This is the part where we break all the rules, right?" Juno smirked. "This is the part where we survive." The engines whined, and the Revenant slipped into the darkness of space like a predator stalking its prey. The Targosian depot was located on a derelict station orbiting a gas giant. It wasn't heavily guarded. Not yet, anyway. The Targosians didn't believe anyone would dare raid their fuel supply so deep within their territory. The Revenant, cloaked and deadly, made its way toward the station. As they approached the station, Juno found herself in the war room once more, staring at the blueprints Xiphos had provided them. The station itself was a massive floating fortress, its hull covered in layers of reinforced plating, its corridors a maze of narrow, tight angles. There were turret emplacements, too, and if they triggered the wrong alarms, there was a good chance they'd be turned into space debris before they even reached the fuel depot. Tarek's fingers drummed softly on his rifle. "So, we're just going to stroll in there and take what we need? No problem?" Riv, still perched at her station, looked up. That's the plan, yes. We'll need to extract the core fuel cells directly from their storage base. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of nervous energy there, a sharpness she was trying to suppress. Just make sure you disable any alarm systems, Juno said, turning to face the team. We don't want them calling for reinforcements while we're in there. We'll only have minutes to get in and out. Milo, who had been silent up until now, looked over his shoulder, his eyes filled with an almost palpable fear. And what about the Targassians? The question hung in the air. Juno bit back a sigh. She already knew what was coming. If we get caught, we fight. It wasn't the answer they wanted to hear, but it was the only one she could give. The Revenant slid into the station's shadow, its cloaking systems holding firm as they drifted closer. Juno could see it now, a massive station stretching across the void. The shape was too large for a simple freighter. It was more like a fortress, its dark exterior crawling with unmarked ships docked around its perimeter. The Targossians had been preparing for something. Juno just didn't know what. Riv, tapping rapidly at the control panel, snapped her fingers. We're in. I've disabled the outer defense systems. We can board now. Juno's heart skipped a beat. Let's go. The docking bay doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a silent, dimly lit corridor inside the station. The only sound was the quiet clack of boots on metal, echoing through the vast emptiness. They moved quickly, shadows within shadows, their weapons ready. Milo led the charge, his rifle trained on every corner, while Tarek brought up the rear. Juno and Riv stayed at the center, Riv scanning for any sign of movement. They had no intention of getting caught. The closer they got to the fuel storage, the more thick the air felt, as though the station itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then they reached it. The fuel vault was massive, an entire chamber buried deep inside the station, surrounded by thick, reinforced walls. The doors were locked, but Riv was already at the terminal, bypassing the security protocols. The fuel cells were just beyond those doors, stored in high-tech containment crates, their glowing orange power signatures visible through the reinforced glass. We're in, Riv said, a smile creeping onto her face. But just as she turned to open the vault doors, the alarms screamed to life. Juno cursed under her breath. The doors slammed shut with a resounding clang, and the sound of heavy boots could be heard in the distance, growing louder. Riv's hands flew over the controls. I've got it. Just a second. But it was too late. The Targossians had found them. The walls shuddered as the Targossian soldiers poured into the hall, their plasma rifles trained on the intruders. The first shot rang out, and everything exploded into chaos. Tarek was the first to fire, his rifle blazing through the corridor, cutting down the first few soldiers who dared approach. Milo's eyes were wide, but he didn't hesitate. He let off a spray of shots, taking out another soldier before ducking for cover. Juno threw herself to the side, drawing her blaster and firing in one fluid motion. A Targossian soldier dropped to the ground, but there were too many coming at them now. We need to move, now! Juno shouted. Riv was still working on the vault. Just give me one more minute. Tarek's voice was a roar. We don't have that long. The air was thick with tension, the station's cold steel feeling like a tomb as the crew fought for their lives, trying to hold back the Targossians long enough for Riv to finish. And then, just as hope began to slip away, Riv's voice came through, barely audible over the sound of gunfire. Got it! The vault doors hissed open, revealing the precious fuel cells, their orange glow blinding in the low light. Juno didn't wait for an order. She grabbed a cell, tossing it into the cart, then grabbed another. The crew was fighting tooth and nail, but they had one shot. One chance to get out alive. The Revenant's systems had prepared them for this. Now it was time to use it. Juno grabbed the last fuel cell, turned to the others, and shouted, "Let's go, now!" The battle for survival had just begun. The vault doors slammed shut behind them, the fuel cells secured in the makeshift cart. Juno didn't have time to think about the implications. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get the hell out of there before the Targassians swarmed the entire station. The distant hum of approaching soldiers echoed, reverberating through the cold, metallic corridors. They had barely seconds before they were surrounded. "Move!" Juno barked, taking the lead as they sprinted down the hallway, the sound of their boots pounding in perfect sync. Behind them, the Targossians were closing in. Their boots echoed louder now, a unified stampede. Riv was at the back, clutching the fuel cells to her chest like they were precious cargo. And they were. "Is the cloaking still active?" Juno shouted over her shoulder. "Yes!" Riv gasped, her voice strained as she ran. "But it won't hold much longer. We're too close to the enemy forces." Tarek's face was set in a grim expression as he threw a grenade around a corner. Boom! The explosion sent debris flying, taking out 2 soldiers in one clean shot. But they were only getting started. More were coming. "Keep going!" Juno commanded, rounding another corner. The metal walls seemed to close in as they sprinted through the narrow corridors. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest, a tightness in her throat that wouldn't relent. They were almost at the docking bay. Riv glanced down at her gauntlet, eyes flashing with concern. "The cloaking field is weakening. We won't make it without being detected." "Then we fight," Juno replied, gritting her teeth. "We won't let them take us alive." They burst into the docking bay, the Revenant waiting for them in the distance, its engines primed and ready to launch. Tarek and Milo took up positions, covering their retreat. Shots rang out from the Targossians, forcing them to duck and scramble for cover. Then the worst happened. The cloaking field flickered out, a momentary flash of light before it collapsed. They were exposed. "Damn it," Riv cursed under her breath, slamming her hand on the console to initiate the docking sequence. Juno didn't wait for the ship to be fully docked. She was already running, her pulse raging. "Get on board, now!" The Targossian fire intensified as they approached, but they made it. The airlock closed just as a barrage of plasma fire shattered the space where they had stood only seconds ago. The Revenant was launched into the void with a screech of its engines, the battle now behind them, but not over. They were alive, but the real fight had only just begun. The Revenant was flying dark, making its way back towards the outer edges of the system where they could lay low. Juno stood on the bridge, staring at the dark expanse of space beyond the glass. The stars twinkled distantly, indifferent to the chaos they had just survived. But the fight wasn't over, and Juno knew that. "Status report," she called out, turning to Riv, who was sitting at the control panel, fingers working at a pace that looked frantic. Riv didn't look up. "The cloaking field's damaged. I can't restore full functionality until we get back to Hekar 7 for repairs. It's going to be a few days." Tarek was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "How long until the Targossians catch up?" Juno's eyes flickered to the tactical display. The Targossian fleet had to have been notified by now. Even with their stolen fuel, they couldn't hide for long. "About 2 days," she replied, tension lining her voice. "We need to prepare for their retaliation. We have no choice but to strike first." Riv finally looked up, her face tight with worry. "You know the stakes. If we attack them, there's no turning back. We're going to be marked for death." Juno met her gaze. "We're already marked. The only difference now is that we'll fight back." She turned to the others. "We'll rest for the night. Tomorrow we strategize. This time we take the fight to them." There was no hesitation in her voice, no trace of doubt. The Revenant was the last of its kind, and they were the only ones who could bring down the Targossian Empire, no matter the cost. The crew sat in the dimly lit war room, the map of the Targosian territories spread out on the table before them. Juno felt the weight of their mission settling in. Every decision now would either lead to victory or death. "We've hit them where it hurts," Milo said, tapping a finger on the map, tracing their route to the heart of the Targosian fleet. "Their fuel supply is compromised. We just need to keep hitting them, force them to spread their forces thin." Riv looked up from her console, her eyes filled with concern. "We can't just keep attacking their supply lines. We'll need intel on their command structure, their fleets." Juno nodded. "We'll need to infiltrate their stronghold, hit their intel networks, and get the coordinates for their fleet. Once we know where they are, we'll strike." Tarek stood up, cracking his neck. "We'll need to move fast. If they're spreading their forces thin, now's our chance." "But we won't have a second chance if we fail," Juno replied, her voice low. She turned to Riv, whose fingers were already flying over the console. "Patch me into their comms. I'll find us a way in." Riv nodded. "Give me a second." The room fell into a tense silence as the systems hummed, the screens lighting up with data. Finally, Riv smirked. "Got it. We've got access to their low-level command feeds. We can track their movements, look for weak points." Juno exhaled, her gaze turning to the map. It's time to hit them where it counts. They were about to embark on a new chapter in their war, one where the Targosians wouldn't see them coming. The Revenant moved silently through the black, cloaked once again. They had found a weak spot in the Targosian command, an underutilized base hidden in the asteroid fields near the outer rim. It was their perfect chance to gather intel, to find the coordinates for the fleet, and to cause as much damage as possible. "We're close," Juno said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've got about 5 minutes until we hit the base," Tarek added. "How are we getting in?" "We'll infiltrate through their hangar bay," Juno said, pointing to the tactical map. "The base has minimal security right now. We'll split up once we're inside. Milo and Tarek, you'll deal with the guards. Riv, you and I will access the comms room." The team nodded, their faces set with grim determination. There was no room for failure. They landed in the hangar bay without a sound, slipping past the unguarded entrances and moving quickly through the base. The walls were cold and sterile, but the crew's nerves were anything but. Every step brought them closer to the heart of the Targosian war machine, and every moment carried the potential for disaster. Once inside, the plan unfolded as expected. Tarek and Milo engaged the guards, taking them out in swift, brutal precision. Juno and Riv made their way to the comms room, their steps muffled by the low hum of the base's systems. Riv worked the terminal, her fingers dancing across the keys as the screen flickered to life. "I'm in. We've got access to their fleet data." Juno took a breath, watching the map appear on the screen. "This is it. Let's make it count." They downloaded the coordinates, the Targosian fleet's current position, and sent a virus to scramble their comms, ensuring that any message they tried to send out would be disrupted. "Done," Riv said, a sly smile creeping onto her face. "Let's go." But as they turned to leave, the base went silent. The alarms rang out, signaling the arrival of reinforcements. They were trapped. The base went into lockdown. Doors slammed shut, cutting off their escape routes. The alarms screamed in their ears. "We've got company!" Tarek shouted, his gun blazing as he held the line. Milo was already moving, setting up a perimeter, but it was clear. The Targosians had figured out their plan. They were surrounded. Juno's eyes locked onto Riv's. "We need to move now. The ship's our only chance." But the soldiers kept coming, more than Juno had anticipated, and they were getting closer. "We don't have the time," Riv said, clutching the virus data. "We need to fight." Juno nodded. The only option was to push through. Tarek was already at the front, taking out soldier after soldier, but it was clear they needed a way out, fast. Juno turned to Milo. You and Tarek cover us. Riv, get us to the hangar. Now. As they rushed toward the hangar, the Targosians closing in, Juno realized they didn't have much time. If they didn't escape soon, they wouldn't make it out alive. Would they? The Revenant shot out of the station's hangar, the engine screaming as the crew fought to keep the ship together. The Targosians were hot on their tail now, battle cruisers in pursuit, their weapons charging. This was it. The final test. Juno gritted her teeth, adrenaline surging through her veins. All systems brace for impact. The battle had begun. They were going to win or die trying. The massive fleet of Zelnar warships hovered in the void of space, their sleek organic hulls pulsing with eerie bioluminescence. For centuries, the Zelnar had dominated the Orion sector, crushing resistance with their advanced technology and ruthless efficiency. No species had ever stood against them for long, until now. A warning beacon flickered on every Zelnar console, displaying a simple yet chilling message. Warning, a human warship is here, and the battle will never be the same. Admiral Vorka of the Zelnar High Command narrowed his many eyes at the message. It was impossible. The humans were nothing more than a young, insignificant race, barely crawling out of their own solar system. Their technology was crude, their ships primitive. How could a single human warship pose any real threat? Yet reports kept pouring in. Destroyed Zelnar cruisers, annihilated patrols, entire supply routes cut off in a matter of days. The humans weren't just fighting. They were winning. Admiral, we have intercepted a transmission from the human ship, a Zelnar officer hissed, his voice filled with uncertainty. Play it, Vorka commanded. The audio crackled before a deep, calm voice resonated across the command deck. This is the UNS Vengeance. You have two choices, retreat or be erased. The silence that followed was suffocating. No species had ever dared to speak to the Zelnar in such a manner. No enemy had ever claimed the power to wipe them out. Vorka let out a slow, guttural growl. Trace their location. I want that ship obliterated. But deep in his core, an unfamiliar feeling took root, a feeling the Zelnar had never known before. For the first time in their history, they felt fear. The UNS Vengeance drifted like a silent predator among the wreckage of the Zelnar fleet. Its dark, angular hull absorbed the faint light of a distant sun, making it nearly invisible against the vast emptiness of space. Unlike the organic, fluid design of the Zelnar ships, Vengeance was a monument to human ingenuity. Brutal, efficient, and built for war. Captain Elias Rourke stood on the bridge, arms crossed, his sharp blue eyes locked onto the holographic display. The Zelnar were regrouping. Their surviving warships had pulled back into a defensive formation, their weapons cycling up to full power. They're not running, Commander Ava Sinclair muttered beside him. They still think they can take us. Rourke exhaled, a slow smirk forming on his face. Then we'll have to educate them. The Zelnar had learned the hard way that humanity fought differently. Unlike other species they had conquered, humans did not bow, did not break. They adapted, they evolved. And when pushed to the brink, they became something terrifying. Admiral Vorka's flagship is at the center of their formation, Tactical Officer Bishop reported. That thing is a monster, 20 times our size, reinforced bio-armor, and it's carrying enough firepower to level a planet. A low chuckle rumbled from Rourke's throat. Sounds like a fair fight. He turned to the comms officer. Patch me through. A few seconds later, the Zelnar command channel opened. Vorka's deep, guttural voice came through, thick with arrogance. Human captain, you will surrender your vessel. You cannot win. Rourke's smirk never faded. Your fleet said the same thing. They're dust now. A pause. The Admiral hadn't expected such defiance. Then Rourke leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You invaded our colonies. You slaughtered our people. Now, Admiral, you get to learn what it feels like when humans go to war. He cut the transmission. All hands, battle stations, he ordered, his voice calm but brimming with purpose. Let's remind them why humans don't lose. The Vengeance surged forward, engines flaring as its massive railguns spun to life. The final battle had begun. The Vengeance roared through the void, its thrusters burning bright against the endless black. On the bridge, Captain Rourke watched as the Zelnar fleet adjusted their formation. They were learning, adapting, but not fast enough. "Incoming fire!" Bishop called out. From the flagship at the center of the enemy formation, a pulse of searing green energy erupted. The massive beam streaked across space, a single blast capable of melting through the hull of a battleship. But the Vengeance was already moving. "Brace!" Sinclair shouted as the ship twisted violently, its inertial dampeners barely keeping up with the maneuver. The energy beam grazed the shields, sending a shudder through the vessel. Warning lights flickered across the consoles, but the damage was minimal. Shields holding at 70%, Bishop reported. "Good," Rourke said, eyes locked onto the Zelnar flagship. "Let's hit them back. Fire the railguns." The ship trembled as its main cannons discharged. Hyper-accelerated tungsten slugs, each the size of a small car, ripped through space at incredible speeds. They struck the enemy warship's bio-armor, shattering through layers of hardened flesh and metallic plating. Explosions rippled across the Zelnar hull, sending debris spinning into the void. "They're bleeding," Sinclair said, her voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. But the Zelnar weren't done. "Multiple torpedoes incoming!" Bishop shouted. "They're locking onto us with gravitic warheads." "Countermeasures!" Rourke barked. Flares and electronic jammers spewed from the Vengeance, disrupting the torpedoes' targeting systems. Some were thrown off course, exploding harmlessly in space, but 3 still closed in. Impact in 5 seconds. "Brace!" The ship shuddered as the warheads detonated against the reinforced hull. The force of the blast sent the Vengeance spiraling for a moment before the thrusters stabilized her. The bridge flickered as emergency lights kicked in. "Shields down to 35%, Bishop reported. "Hull damage on decks 4 through 6. Rourke clenched his fists. The Vengeance was powerful, but she couldn't take sustained punishment. If they didn't end this fight soon, the Zelnar would wear them down. He turned to Sinclair. "How close can we get to their flagship?" She hesitated. "That thing is putting out enough firepower to swat a fleet. Getting close would be suicide." A slow grin formed on Rourke's face. "Only if we don't finish them first." Sinclair's eyes widened as she realized what he was suggesting. "You want to board them?" "More than that," Rourke said, voice like steel. "I want to take their ship." Silence filled the bridge. It was madness. The Zelnar flagship was a fortress, filled with thousands of enemy soldiers. But Rourke had something the Zelnar didn't understand. Humans. And when humanity was pushed to the brink, they didn't retreat. They charged. He activated the ship-wide comms. "All hands, prepare for assault. We're taking the fight to them." The Vengeance burned toward the enemy flagship at full speed. The Zelnar had started this war. Now, humanity was going to finish it. The Vengeance rocketed toward the Zelnar flagship like a missile, its thrusters burning bright as it closed the gap. The enemy warship loomed ahead, a monstrous fortress of biometal and pulsating alien energy. Plasma cannons lined its hull, spitting out streams of green fire, but the Vengeance weaved through them like a ghost, dodging incoming blasts with ruthless precision. 10 seconds to contact, Sinclair shouted over the chaos. Rourke gripped the armrest of his chair, his pulse steady despite the madness unfolding around him. Bishop, charge the breaching array. As soon as we're in range, punch a hole in their hull. Roger that, Captain. The Zelnar must have realized what was happening, because their flagship's defenses suddenly shifted. Large organic tendrils, bristling with weapons, extended from its hull, lashing out in an attempt to swat the Vengeance aside. Brace! The ship lurched as one of the appendages scraped against its side, sending a deep, bone-rattling vibration through the decks. Sparks flew from overloaded circuits, but the Vengeance held its course. 5 seconds. The hull of the Zelnar flagship loomed close, a pulsating wall of alien armor. Firing breaching array. A burst of concentrated energy erupted from the Vengeance, slamming into the enemy's hull with the force of a falling star. The biometal twisted and ruptured, exposing a massive breach in the ship's side. The vacuum of space pulled debris and unlucky Zelnar crew members out into the black abyss. Rourke didn't wait. Launch boarding teams! We take their ship or we die trying! The Vengeance's hangars exploded with activity as boarding pods launched like bullets, hurtling through space toward the breach. Inside each pod, heavily armored human Marines gripped their weapons, their expressions hard as stone. They were about to step into the belly of the beast. Rourke turned to Sinclair. You're with me. Let's show these bastards what humans are made of. Sinclair smirked. Wouldn't miss it for the world, sir. Their boarding pod detached from the Vengeance, engines flaring as it shot toward the breach. The moment it made contact, magnetic clamps engaged, sealing it to the Zelnar hull. A loud clang echoed through the pod as the doors slid open, revealing a dark, pulsating corridor beyond. The air inside was thick with a sickly green mist, the walls lined with organic tubing that pulsed like veins. A low growl echoed from the depths of the ship. Movement ahead, one of the Marines muttered, raising his rifle. Rourke stepped forward, his own weapon steady. Let's go introduce ourselves. And with that, humanity stepped into the heart of the Zelnar flagship, ready to bring the war to them. The air inside the Zelnar flagship was thick, humid, and foul. Every breath felt like inhaling something alive, the walls pulsing with a grotesque, organic rhythm. Dim, green, bioluminescent veins ran along the corridors, casting long, shifting shadows. The ship itself wasn't just a machine. It was a living nightmare. Rourke moved forward, rifle raised, boots squelching against the fleshy floor. Behind him, Sinclair and the Marines spread out in a tight formation, their movements precise and silent. The Zelnar were here somewhere, waiting, watching. Stay sharp, Rourke muttered into his comm. They won't let us take this ship without a fight. As if on cue, a low, wet, gurgling sound echoed through the corridor. The Marines froze. Then the walls shifted. A dozen Zelnar warriors burst from the shadows, their sleek, chitinous bodies moving with inhuman speed. They were terrifying creatures, standing over 7 feet tall, with multi-jointed limbs ending in razor-sharp claws. Their eyeless heads pulsed with an eerie, sickly glow, and their mouths, lined with rows of jagged teeth, split open in a screech of rage. "Contact!" Bishop roared. The first wave of Zelnar lunged. The corridor exploded in gunfire. Rourke fired in controlled bursts, his rifle rounds punching through alien carapace, splattering the walls with thick, blue-black blood. A Marine beside him went down, a Zelnar's claws ripping through his armor like paper. "Hold the line!" Sinclair shouted, emptying her clip into a charging enemy. The Zelnar shrieked and collapsed, twitching violently before going still. A warrior leaped straight at Rourke, its claws flashing. He rolled aside just in time, feeling the wind from the strike pass inches from his face. Before the creature could recover, he slammed his combat knife into its throat, twisting hard. The Zelnar convulsed, then collapsed in a heap. The corridor fell silent. "Clear!" a Marine called out, panting. Rourke wiped a streak of alien blood from his visor and surveyed the carnage. The floor was littered with Zelnar corpses, their bodies still twitching. The Marines had taken losses, 3 men down, 2 more wounded. "We need to keep moving," Sinclair said, reloading her weapon. "If we give them time, they'll regroup." Rourke nodded. "Bishop, where's the command center?" Bishop checked his scanner, frowning. "Their ship layout is organic, but I'm reading a large structure ahead, maybe a control nexus." "Then that's where we're going," Rourke said. "If we can take their command center, we can override the ship's systems." Sinclair smirked. "Steal their flagship right out from under them?" Rourke grinned. "Exactly." The Marines tightened their formation and pushed forward, deeper into the belly of the beast. The Zelnar thought they were the galaxy's apex predators. They were about to learn what happened when humans refused to die. The deeper they moved into the Zelnar flagship, the more the ship seemed to resist them. The corridors twisted in unnatural ways, shifting beneath their feet as if trying to disorient them. Pulsating veins along the walls thickened, leaking a strange, glowing fluid that smelled of decay. "This thing is alive," Bishop muttered, scanning the walls with his visor. "No kidding," Sinclair replied, eyes sweeping the corridor ahead. "Feels like we're walking through a dam's stomach." Rourke kept his rifle up, pushing forward. "Stay focused. This ship bleeds, which means it can die, and we're going to make sure it does." A sudden tremor rocked the corridor, nearly knocking them off their feet. "That wasn't from vengeance," Bishop said grimly. "No, it wasn't. The Zelnar were adapting, fighting back." Then the walls opened up. From the dark recesses of the ship, grotesque new forms emerged, larger, bulkier than the warriors they had just fought. These Zelnar were encased in thick bio-armor, their limbs bristling with natural weapons, bone spikes, serrated blades, and barbed whips dripping with some kind of venom. Their elongated skulls pulsed with eerie light as they stalked forward. "Heavy units," Sinclair said, gripping her weapon tighter. "They brought the big boys." The Zelnar didn't screech or rush them this time. They advanced with slow, deliberate movements, predators who knew they had the upper hand. Rourke didn't wait. "Light 'em up!" The corridor exploded in gunfire as the Marines opened fire. Armor-piercing rounds slammed into the creatures, but their thick plating absorbed most of the shots. The Zelnar marched forward, unfazed, their clawed feet sinking into the fleshy ground. One of them raised an arm, and before anyone could react, a whip-like tendril lashed out, striking a Marine square in the chest. The man screamed as the barbed appendage tore through his armor and yanked him forward. Before he could even raise his rifle, the Zelnar crushed his skull with a single blow. "Fall back!" Rourke shouted. "We need heavier weapons!" The team retreated as Sinclair pulled a grenade from her belt. She primed it, her lips curled into a smirk. "Let's see how they like this." She tossed it. The explosion rocked the corridor, sending a shockwave of fire and shrapnel through the charging Zelnar. 2 of the heavy units went down, their armored shells cracking open as glowing blue ichor spilled from their wounds. But the others kept coming. "Captain, if we don't change tactics, we're going to get chewed up," Bishop warned. Rourke's mind raced. They needed to hit the Zelnar where it hurt, fast and brutal. He glanced at his HUD map. The command center was close. If they could just make it there. "We don't fight them," Rourke decided. "We run." The Marines hesitated for only a second before Rourke barked, "Move!" They turned and sprinted down the corridor, weapons firing blindly behind them to slow the Zelnar advance. The heavy warriors howled in frustration, their massive frames slowing them down just enough for the humans to gain distance. "Command center's just ahead!" Bishop shouted. Rourke saw it, a massive, pulsating chamber with a towering central structure covered in glowing strands of Zelnar neural tissue. This was it, the brain of the ship. He didn't stop running. "Blow the doors! We make our stand inside!" A Marine fired a breaching charge. The blast tore through the entrance, and the team rushed in. As soon as they crossed the threshold, Rourke slammed the emergency override panel, sealing the door shut behind them. Heavy thuds echoed as the Zelnar pounded against the barrier, shrieking in rage. But for now, the humans had a moment to breathe. "All right," Rourke said, turning toward the towering control nexus in the center of the chamber. "Let's take this ship." The real battle was just beginning. The command center pulsed like a living heart, its walls rippling with waves of alien energy. Thick, glowing strands of neural tissue stretched from the central control nexus, threading through the ship like a vast nervous system. The entire vessel was alive, and it knew they were here. Rourke scanned the chamber. No guards, no immediate threats. That meant only one thing. "They don't think we can do it," Sinclair muttered, wiping sweat and alien blood from her face. "They think wrong," Rourke said, stepping forward. Bishop moved to the central control structure, his scanner flickering with data. "This thing's a biological supercomputer. If we can sink into it, we might be able to override." The ship screamed. A deep, guttural roar rumbled through the chamber, shaking the walls. The Zelnar weren't just attacking from outside. They were fighting from within. The walls around the nexus peeled open, revealing massive, sinewy tendrils covered in razor-sharp barbs. The ship itself was responding to the invasion. "They're trying to kill us with their own damn command center," Sinclair shouted, raising her rifle. The tendrils lashed out. Rourke barely dodged as one snapped toward him, embedding itself into the ground where he had stood a second ago. Another wrapped around a Marine's leg, yanking him off the ground and slamming him into the wall. His screams were cut short as the ship absorbed him into its fleshy surface. "Get him out!" Bishop yelled, firing into the mass of living tissue. "Too late!" Rourke shouted. The Marine was already gone. The ship was fighting like an organism purging an infection. And they were the infection. "We need to shut this thing down now," Sinclair barked. Bishop ran a gloved hand over the pulsating control strands, scanning them. "There's a neural relay here. If we overload it, we could kill the ship's consciousness. It'll be blind, defenseless." "How much firepower do we need?" Rourke asked, dodging another tendril. Bishop hesitated. "Too much. We don't have the explosives to—" Sinclair grabbed a grenade from her belt. "What if we do?" Bishop's eyes widened. "You're insane. You detonate that inside the Nexus and we might not make it out alive?" Sinclair grinned, wild and fearless. "Then we better run fast." Rourke didn't hesitate. "Do it." Sinclair yanked the pin and shoved the grenade into the Nexus, wedging it between the thickest neural strands. Instantly, the ship screamed again, the walls convulsing in panic. "Go! Go! Go!" Rourke bellowed. They sprinted towards the exit, dodging thrashing tendrils as the entire chamber collapsed in on itself. The floor buckled, neural cords snapping like electrical wires, spewing alien energy across the walls. The grenade exploded. A massive shockwave tore through the ship, sending Rourke and his team flying. The walls shrieked one last time, then the entire structure went still. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then Bishop groaned. "Did it work?" Rourke pushed himself up, coughing. "Check your scanner." Bishop fumbled with his device, then grinned. "The ship's brain is dead. We own this thing now." Sinclair sat up, laughing breathlessly. Told you it would work. Outside, the pounding on the doors had stopped. The Zelnar had gone eerily silent. Rourke exhaled and keyed his comms. Vengeance, this is Rourke. The enemy flagship is ours. Repeat, the enemy flagship is ours. A pause. Then a burst of static before the voice of the Vengeance's comms officer came through, disbelieving, but triumphant. Holy hell, Captain. You just stole the biggest warship in the sector? Rourke looked around at the wreckage, the burned-out Zelnar tech, and the exhausted but victorious Marines beside him. Damn right we did. The war wasn't over, but the Zelnar had just learned a lesson they would never forget. Humans weren't prey. They were the apex predators now, and the battle would never be the same.